You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode, we're reviewing the first test between Sri Lanka and Australia. Complete domination by Australia to crush Sri Lanka by an innings and 242 runs. Outstanding batting and bowling performances from Khawaja, Smith, Inglis, and Lyon and Kuhnemann. Also, Australia in the process have retained the Warren Ruhliffelin Trophy and still maintain their perfect record of holding every bilateral trophy on offer in Test cricket. For Sri Lanka, it was an underwhelming performance. Missed opportunities, dropped catches, missed reviews, poor batting and poor bowling contributed to one of Sri Lankan cricket's heaviest defeats in their Test history. And it certainly was a heavy defeat. To lose by an innings and 242 runs, that's a bit of a beating. And Sri Lanka really had their pants pulled down in this Test match. They were poor across the board, and that's been well documented by many people. Following this first Test, it was really poor showing from Sri Lanka. No fight, no spirit. And for Australia, complete dominance. Across the entire 4 days, complete dominance from the first session on day one until the second session on day four, where the Test match ended. And the Test match ended for 9 sessions, and Australia dominated all 9. So it just shows you how well Australia played. So a disappointing result for Sri Lanka, a brilliant result for Australia. Plenty to talk about and discuss from this first test between Sri Lanka and Australia. We'll get into that in today's episode. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, first of all, let's remind ourselves of how this game panned out in terms of the results, in terms of the scores and how this game went down in terms of that. So we'll have a look at the match summary. And Australia batted first. They won the toss. They amassed 6 for 654 declared in their first innings. Usman Khawaja top scored with his maiden double century, 232. And Jeffrey Van der Stey and Pradap Jayasuriya took 3 wickets each for Sri Lanka to take the 6 wickets for Sri Lanka in the first innings. Sri Lanka in their first innings were bowled out for 165. Dinesh Chandimal top scored with 72. And Matt Kuhnemann took 5 wickets for Australia, his second 5-wicket haul, to follow the 5-wicket haul that he picked up in 2023 against India in Indore. Sri Lanka were asked to follow on by Australia, and they were bowled out for 247 after being asked to follow on. Jeffrey Van der Stey top scored with 53, and Nathan Lyon and Matt Kuhnemann did the damage for Australia, taking 4 wickets each to help Australia bowl Sri Lanka out for 247 after following on. Australia won by an innings and 242 runs, and obviously Usman Khawaja was named player of the match for his maiden double century. That's pretty much how the Test match panned out. Dominance from Australia from start to finish, and Sri Lanka were really poor and weren't up to the mark. Now then, let's discuss some of the key moments and key factors that really changed the course of this Test match and really were the turning points in terms of how this Test match panned out the way it did. There were only really 2 key moments in this Test match that really decided this Test match and the fate of Sri Lanka, first of all, and also the victory for Australia. And that was pretty much Australia winning the toss. That was a key moment. Obviously, batting first, scoring 6 for 654. That was always a big advantage for Australia. And Steve Smith wasn't too concerned that Australia were batting first. He was absolutely delighted as soon as the side of the coin landed in his favour at the toss. He was delighted to bat first, and he was happily delighted with that. And that was a big thing for Australia, winning the toss, batting first, getting over 650, really put them in a strong, dominant position in the Test match. And the other key moment was Sri Lanka missing the opportunities. We saw that from Sri Lanka in this Test match on day one. The missed opportunities, the missed reviews, the drop catches. If they held on to their opportunities in terms of their drop catches, obviously they dropped Steve Smith on 1. As soon as he ticked over 10,000 runs, he was dropped by Pradap Jayasuriya for 1 next ball. Caught and bowled chance, which should have been taken. And then obviously Usman Khawaja, which was dropped in the 90s. He was dropped by Kusal Mendes behind the stumps. And also the missed DRS reviews. Travis Head should have been out LBW, but Sri Lanka didn't review it. That was one missed opportunity with the reviews. The second one was Usman Khawaja. Didn't review that, Sri Lanka. And he turned out to be out, caught behind. But no one went upstairs. No one reviewed it. So if Sri Lanka had those opportunities go their way, it could have been a different outcome for Australia in terms of them being 4 down, probably 5 down for not many, rather than be 6 for 654 declared. So those were the couple of key moments that really decided, Australia going on to win this test match and Sri Lanka falling so behind the way they did. And they weren't really going to win the test match from that on in Sri Lanka. So those couple of moments really had an impact on the test match. Now then, let's talk about Sri Lanka. And talk about their team performance in this test match. A record innings defeat in terms of a historical context for Sri Lanka. The losing margin of an innings and 242 runs is their worst innings defeat in their test history, Sri Lanka. And that's a pretty damning stat and record that you don't want. The previous record was an innings and 239 runs, and that was against India 8 years ago in 2017 in Nagpur, I believe it was. So for Sri Lanka, a disappointing result, really. They were poor across the board. The batting was poor. The bowling was poor. The figures from the spinners reflected that in the 150-plus region. It just shows you how badly the bowlers went about their business. And then the fielding at times was poor. They dropped catches and the missed opportunities with the reviews, as we've mentioned. They could have had Travis Head out, LBW, didn't review it. Could have had Usman Khawaja out, caught behind, didn't review it in the 90s. Drop catches, Pradap Jayasuriya dropping Smith on 1 after Steve Smith brought up his 10,000 run. He was dropped, caught and bowled by Pradap Jayasuriya. And then obviously Kusal Mendes dropping Usman Khawaja in the 90s, caught behind, chance, put down. So that was the tale of Sri Lanka's test match, really. They just weren't really up for it. They weren't competing. They didn't show fight. They didn't show spirit. And they just fell over, really. As soon as they lost the toss, excuse me, as soon as they lost the toss, they sort of said, you know what, we've lost the toss, that's it, we're going to lose the test match. And it's usually a big thing in Gaul. If you win the toss, you bat big and bat long. That's what Australia did. If you're batting second, it's going to be a tough road back. And that's what happened with Sri Lanka. De Silva's captaincy was poor. Dhananjaya De Silva, he had a pretty poor game, really. He got out in this test match in very ordinary fashion. The first innings, he was out stumped by Carey off the bowling of Kuhnemann. And then in the second innings, he got out to Kuhnemann again, this time trying to take him on over the offside and held out to the man of the deep. And Bo Webster took the catch. That was a really poor dismissal. And it was a really poor test match for Dhananjaya De Silva as captain. I thought his captaincy was left to be desired. He wasn't inspiring. He let the game drift and meander. His field placements, he was following the ball. Every time Australia hit the ball in a gap, he put a fielder. You can't do that as a captain. And that's what he did. And really, there was, poor captaincy there from De Silva. And, leading with the bat, leading from the front, both of his dismissals, even though he made 22 and 39, he looked pretty good when he was at the crease. But those dismissals were really bad from a captain. You expect better from your captain. And it was really poor, really, from Sri Lanka. Really poor and really disappointing from De Silva. Now, in terms of the batting for Sri Lanka, it was really poor. They were bowled out for 165 and 247 after being asked to follow on by Australia. Chasing 654, this was always bound to happen. That you're going to have a couple of bad innings, and that's what happened with Sri Lanka. They lacked fight, spirit. They showed a little bit of fight at times in the test match with their batting. The first innings, they had some partnerships that showed a bit of resistance. The second innings, the tail enders showed a little bit of fight through Jeffrey Van der Sey, who scored a half century. The last wickets there, the 9th and 10th wicket partnerships, putting on 57 and 38 before Australia finished off the job. So they showed a little bit of fight, Sri Lanka, but it wasn't enough. And it was really disappointing from Sri Lanka with the batting. No partnerships at all. Batters got in and got starts, but didn't go on with them. The only two batters who were looking comfortable and good at the crease was Chandimal, 72 and 31. And then you had Jeffrey Van der Sey score his 53 in the second innings. Both of them were very comfortable. And the rest were just shocking, really. Then they had the batting collapse, the start of day 4. They lost the last 5 wickets of their first innings for 9 runs. And then at the start of the second innings, when they were asked to follow on by Australia, they lost 3 quick wickets. And they lost 8 wickets in the morning session. Also, Dinesh Chandimal, he joins the rare list of a batter in Test cricket being dismissed by the same bowler on the same day in the same session. And he got out twice to Nathan Lyon in this Test match. So whenever those rare feats in the game are achieved, then you know that you've had a pretty bad day with the bat and a pretty bad performance overall. And that's what happened with Sri Lanka. They couldn't recover from that, and they weren't going to win. They weren't going to draw the test, even though there was some question marks about the weather. Even that couldn't save Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka just horrible, really, with their batting. It was pretty poor. You expect better from some of these batters who have played a lot of Test cricket, the likes of Kurakna, Matthews, De Silva. Kusal Mendes was shocking. That first innings dismissal with the sweep. Australia put the man out at deep square leg and he fell for the trap. He's played a lot of Test cricket, but he's been disappointing in his Test career, really. Hasn't really lived up to his potential. So really poor from Sri Lanka with their batting. There's nothing more to say, really. It was an absolute horror show with their batting performance. Now we turn over to the bowling for Sri Lanka, and that was pretty poor as well. The Sri Lankan spinners didn't really have much of an impact in this Test match. Pradap Jayasuriya conceded 193 runs in 60 overs. Jeffrey Van der Sey, 182 from 38 overs. Nishan Peris, none for 189. The worst ever figures by a Sri Lankan bowler in a single Test innings in a Test match for Sri Lanka without taking a wicket. That's a record you don't want to have. Asita Fernando was poor. None for 77 from 15. He did he had a little part to play in this Test match, but it wasn't a big part to play. He got his lines and lengths wrong and really didn't have a great Test match. So that was the tale of Sri Lanka's bowling. Pretty poor, ineffective. And I think that was the difference between the two spinning groups. With Australia's spinners, they were able to get more out of the surface, even though it was a slow turning surface in Galle. They were able to get more out of the surface than the Sri Lankan spinners. Because they bowled into the surface, they got enough revs on the ball, they bowled with energy and pace. They bowled a lot quicker. Whereas the Sri Lankan spinners, who have grown up in these conditions for years, you see it with all spinners from the subcontinent, from subcontinental teams like Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. You don't really need to bowl fast as a spinner because the pitches that you play on are going to do all the work anyway. But on pitches like this, which are not offering a lot for the spinners, it's very slow turn. You have to change your pace and you have to bowl with energy behind the ball and get the ball to dip, get the ball to rev, get it to turn off the surface. The Australian bowlers do that so well because they play on pitches in Australia that don't turn as much. So they have to put that energy on the ball and they have to bowl faster. The Sri Lankan spinners don't. And then you become a bit lazy because you just expect the pitch to do it. Well, you have to put in the effort. You have to put in the energy. And that was the big difference. That's why Pradap Jayasuriya wasn't effective. You know, it wasn't a 12-wicket haul Test match for him like it was in 2022 when he debuted against Australia. Probably the best bowler for Sri Lanka was Jeffrey Van der Sey. He bowled really well, the leg spinner. He also batted well, scored a half century, as we've already talked about. But I thought his bowling performance was pretty good. That delivery he bowled to Marnus Labuschagne, the one that pitched on leg stump and turned away to off stump. Everyone was saying it was reminiscent of Shane Warne back in 1993 with the ball of the century to Mike Gannon at Old Trafford. And it was very similar. So, he had a pretty good test match. Perez was poor. He wasn't effective at all, the off-spinner. Asita Fernando was poor. He didn't have much to play a role as the only quick bowler in the side. Pradap Jayasuriya was poor. He bowled 60 overs and took 3 wickets for 193 runs. It just shows he had a pretty tough day at the office. So the Sri Lankan bowlers weren't up to the task. They've got a lot of work to do going into the second test of the series, and something for the spinners to take a bit of a leaf out of the Australian spinners book, and that is to bowl a lot faster, a lot quicker, and a bit more energy into the ball as well. And that's what they need to do. So they didn't do that enough. They'll probably do that for the second test. But to finish off about Sri Lanka, underwhelming performance. They've got to do better. Can they do better? That's the question going into the second test. Can they bounce back like they did in 2022 to draw the series against Australia? Can they do that in 2025? That remains to be seen. After what we saw in this first test, probably not. But, test cricket, you've got an opportunity to bounce back. They've got to bounce back in a big way, Sri Lanka, because it was really underwhelming with the bat, ball, and in the field. And also the captaincy from De Silva was left to be desired as well. So a lot of work for Sri Lanka to do going into the second test. Now then, let's talk about Australia and talk about their dominant performance in this first test of the series against Sri Lanka. It was a really dominant performance by Australia. From start to finish, they dominated the test match from day 1 to day 4. Every session in this test match, they dominated. This is probably Australia's most dominant performance in the subcontinent for some time. I think we have to go back to the early 2000s where they were playing those test matches in the UAE against Pakistan, where Pakistan were bowled out for 50 in both innings in that series. I think we have to go back until probably that series in the early 2000s where Australia have been dominant on the subcontinent. So it's been a very long time of seeing Australia being so dominant in the subcontinent. And we saw that in this test match against Sri Lanka. Yes, everyone will say it's against Sri Lanka, so what? But you still have to play against the opposition that's in front of you, and you still have to perform, and you still have to execute the skills. And Australia did that with both bat and ball. Terrific batting displays from Khawaja, maiden double century. Travis Head was pretty good at the top of the order opening. Steve Smith scoring centuries once again and captaining pretty well. Josh Inglis, what a start to his test career. A debut century. The bowlers did well. Kuhnemann, another 5-wicket haul in his test career, his second one, took 9 wickets for the match. Nathan Lyon took 7. Mitchell Starc took 3 for the match. Todd Murphy only took 1, but did his role to an extent. So everyone chipped in. It was a real team performance. And to win by an innings and 242 runs is a pretty good result for Australia. It is the 4th highest in terms of an innings victory for Australia in Test cricket history, which just shows you that it's one of their biggest wins that they've ever had. The 6 for 654 declared is their highest total in Sri Lanka. It's also their highest total in Asia. So a few records were broken during this Test match for Australia, which is to be expected when you play so well. We'll talk about the batting with Australia, and I thought the Australian batters had really good plans to the Sri Lankan spinners. Yes, the pitch here in Galle wasn't a typical Galle surface. It was quite slow, and the spinners were producing slow turn from the Sri Lankan point of view. But I thought the batters had really good plans. They used their feet. They played the sweep, reverse sweep, the paddle very well. Usman Khawaja was outstanding with the reverse sweep. He just kept nailing them for 4 and getting runs off it, which was fantastic. Also playing forward and back, getting deep into the crease, getting forward, either in attack or defense was pretty good. The rotation of strike was excellent. The Australian batters didn't let the Sri Lankan spinners bowl to them for long periods of time. They rotated the strike nicely. We saw that in the partnerships with Khawaja and Smith and Inglis and Khawaja. Good rotation of strike. So it was really good from Australia. It's good to see that the preparation, the experience of coming back to the subcontinent again has served them well. Khawaja, Head, Labuschagne, Smith, Inglis, Carey. They've been to the subcontinent many times now. And it's good to see that the lessons they've learned on previous tours to India, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan are starting to pay off. And that's good to see. A couple of big partnerships really that really helped Australia get to that 6 for 654 declared. Khawaja and Smith's partnership of 266 for the third wicket was a record-breaking partnership for Australia in Sri Lanka. It's the highest partnership for Australia in Sri Lanka, and that was surpassing the previous best of 258 for the fourth wicket between Shaun Marsh and Michael Hussey. That was back in Kelly back in 2011, where Shaun Marsh debuted and scored a debut 100 in that test match at Kelly. Also, the partnership between Khawaja and Inglis, 146 for the fourth wicket, was good as well. So Australia, very pleased with their batting performance, no doubt. Usman Khawaja, let's talk about him. Excellent innings, 232, his first double century in test matches, going past his previous score, which was in the 190s, not out, which was against South Africa a few years ago at the SCG. A lot of people said that he should have got a double century in that test match, but we all know the reasons why he didn't, because that test match was affected by rain. But he got the double century here in Sri Lanka. He batted magnificently. As I mentioned before, playing the reverse sweep was a highlight of Khawaja's innings, really nailing the reverse sweep and the conventional sweep, using his feet, getting forward and back. And it was just magnificent to watch Khawaja. He's had a lot of problems in the past, Usman Khawaja, about playing against spin. He's certainly banished those demons. And most of Usman Khawaja's outstanding innings in Test cricket have come in the subcontinent. This innings against Sri Lanka, the innings that he played in 2018 in the UAE against Pakistan, where Australia drew that Test match in Dubai. Pakistan, where he scored that 100. India, where he scored 180 odd in the last test of that series in 2023. Yes, be it in Ahmedabad on a very flat wicket, but still, he scored 100 nonetheless. So he's really improved Usman Khawaja. A lot of pressure coming into the test match for Usman Khawaja, given the lean summer that he had against India. And it wasn't, Usman Khawaja was the only one not to struggle against Jasprit Bumrah. The rest of the Australian top order did. So it was a pretty lean summer for all of them, not only for Usman Khawaja, but he turned it around. And it just shows that Australia really want him in these conditions, because he's arguably, probably him and Smith, are probably Australia's best players of spin. And we saw that on display in this test match. So good to see Usman Khawaja doing well. He also rode his luck as well. A couple of missed opportunities for Sri Lanka. They should have got him out with a dropped catch. He was in the 90s. Kusal Mendes put him down. There was a missed DRS review for a caught behind. Sri Lanka didn't review it. He got away with that. So for Usman Khawaja, a terrific innings from him. And it was a fantastic innings to watch, really. And I think everyone has said the same thing. And also for Usman Khawaja, he becomes the second oldest Australian to score a double century in Test cricket. Obviously, Don Bradman is the other one who scored double centuries in his late 30s at the age of 38 and 39. So Usman Khawaja is at the same age, 38, 39. And another record for him there. Steve Smith, terrific knock. Good to see Steve Smith coming back into form. He's scoring centuries again like he used to. 35th Test century for him, which is just unbelievable. 10,000 Test runs. He becomes the fourth Australian behind Alan Border, Steve Waugh, and Ricky Ponting in that order to score 10,000 runs for Australia in Test cricket. He's also the 15th Australian, or he's also the 15th player, I should say, in Test cricket history to score 10,000 runs, which is a fantastic achievement for Steve Smith. It was a bit risky when he got the 10,000 run. It was a quick single. He nearly got run out. He would have been out next ball as well, because he played back to, hit it back to Pradap Jayasuriya for a caught and bowled chance, and he got dropped on one. So Steve Smith had a couple of lives there, but he went on to make 141. He made Sri Lanka pay for those missed opportunities. And, terrific game. He had a brilliant game as captain, very proactive. He rotated the spinners and the bowlers quite well. The field placements were good. another good game as captain for Steve Smith. A terrific innings. Good to see Steve Smith scoring runs again. And really, he looks a different player from the start of the Australian summer against India until now. He's a different player. He looks very sprightly at the crease. He looks like he's playing in his 20s again. He looks youthful. He looks young. He looks free, which is terrific to see. I suppose when you're scoring runs, that's what it does. I suppose you have that sort of freshness with your batting. Rejuvenation, that's the word. And Steve Smith has certainly got that. So terrific to see Smith do that. Lead the way as captain for this series in the absence of Pat Cummins, but also to bat the way he did was quite good for his 141. Josh Inglis, what a century on Test debut. He becomes the 21st Australian to score 100 on Test debut. The last four who have scored a Test century on debut for Australia are all from Western Australia. So Josh Inglis, Adam Verges in 2015, Shaw Marsh in 2011, Marcus North in 2009, all of them, the last four, including Josh Inglis, who have scored a Test century on debut for Australia, are from Western Australia. So Josh Inglis joins that group, and a terrific opportunity for Josh Inglis to play in this Test match. He really deserves his opportunity. He's been in the squad for some time, and there was going to be an indication that he may play in this series in Sri Lanka. He certainly grabbed his opportunity with both hands in this first Test match. To move over from England to Australia, his parents had to do that to further his cricket career. He's really made the most of it. And I think the reason that Josh Inglis wasn't overawed by the occasion, obviously when you play your first Test match, you're quite nervous and tense. But I suppose when you've played international cricket for a long time, Josh Inglis has been a part of the Australian side in both the ODIs and T20s for a very long time. He's already scored runs in those formats. He's scored 2 T20 centuries already for Australia. And now to score a Test century. He wasn't overawed by the occasion. So I think playing for Australia before, having experience at the international level, has served him well in this first innings of his Test career to score 100 on Test debut. I thought he was pretty good against the spin, used his feet well, played the sweeps, conventional and reverse sweeps. He used his feet, danced down the wicket. He was pretty good. Didn't really show any signs of weakness at all. He looks like he belongs at the Test level. And let's hope for Josh Inglis, he has a very prosperous Test career. But for him, for the rest of his life, no one can take away that he is an Australian Test cricketer and he scored a Test century in his first ever innings of asking. No one can ever take that away from Josh Inglis. So that's a superb achievement for Josh Inglis. So Australia's batting overall pretty dominant, really dominant, and really good to see Australia finally applying the lessons that they've learned from the previous tours of the subcontinent. It's finally coming into fruition, and it's good to see the results in action. So they'll be very pleased with their batting from this first Test Australia. Last but not least, let's talk about the bowling before we move on. And the Australian bowling was pretty good. I thought Mitchell Starc was outstanding. Picking up early wickets to really set the tone for Australia in both innings. Matt Kuhnemann, 9 wickets for the match, Pfeiffer in the first and 4 in the second. It's brilliant to see Matt Kuhnemann come back. Obviously, in the Big Bash, he had that thumb injury where his thumb was popped out. He had to have surgery on his right thumb. He's a left-arm bowler, let's remember. So the right hand is not his bowling hand, but still, it's an injury. And it's a miracle. It's a miracle that he's got up for this series. And he bowled magnificently in this Test match. To take 5 wickets, his second 5-wicket haul in Test cricket, to follow the one that he got in India when he debuted in that series back in 2023 when he picked up that 5-wicket haul there. He bowled pretty well. Good bowling partnership with him and Nathan Lyon, who also bowled well. Good to see Nathan Lyon bowling well. He loves bowling in Sri Lanka. This is where it all started for him. Back in 2011 when he made his debut in Gaul. He loves bowling here. He's got 20-odd wickets now in Gaul at an average of, I think it's 20-odd or something like that. It's a pretty good record to have at a ground that you've had a lot of success at. So Nathan Lyon, once again, was pretty good. He got rid of Dennis Chandamal out a couple of times in this test match on the same day in the same session, as we've already discussed before when we talked about Sri Lanka's batting. Todd Murphy had a pretty quiet test match, Todd Murphy. And I suppose when you're the third spinner, it's always a difficult position to be in when you're the third spinner. You don't get much of a bowl. He only bowled 6 overs in the first innings. He bowled 11 in the second, but he took a wicket. It was a key wicket of Dimiv Kururakta, who just left a straight ball, which knocked over his off stump. So Todd, let's hope for him he can get some wickets in the second test. But he bowled okay. He did his role. He got a wicket. So the Australian bowlers were pretty dominant, really. They really got more out of the surface, the Australian spinners. And we've already discussed that before, is that the Australian spinners got more energy on the ball. They bowled more pace. They were a lot quicker than the Sri Lankan bowlers, spin bowlers, that is, because they got that energy. They bowled quicker into the surface. They were able to exploit the turn that was on offer. Even though it was slow turn, they were able to get sharp turn at times because of those reasons I mentioned. And that was the difference, really, between the Australian and Sri Lankan spinners. To bowl Sri Lanka out for 165, 247, just indicated that it was a pretty good bowling performance by the Australian team. And they'll be very confident and very happy about going into the second test, that they'll be able to repeat what they did with the ball in this first test in the second test. So very good for Australia there. And to finish off about Australia's performance, yeah, pretty dominant. Bat, ball in the field, pretty dominant. Just a one-sided contest, really. And Australia absolutely bullied Sri Lanka into submission in this test match, and they just dominated from ball one. And they will have tremendous confidence going into the second test and hoping to win their first series in Sri Lanka since 2011. Now then, let's preview the second test of the series between Sri Lanka and Australia and talk about both teams in terms of selections, who will face the chopping block and potential 11s, and what are they going to do for the second test of the series. So the second test will be back at the Galle International Stadium. Both test matches are being played here in Galle, back-to-back test matches at the same venue. Let's have a look at the stats between the two teams, Sri Lanka and Australia, here in Galle. First test match they played here was back in 1999. They've played 7 matches. They've drawn 1. Sri Lanka have won 2. And Australia have improved their record in Galle by winning this first test match. They take up their tally of wins here in Galle to 4 after winning the first test match of the series. So let's talk about Sri Lanka in terms of their selections and 11 and what they need to do to bounce back. Sri Lanka, they got to bounce back quickly. It was a pretty poor, ordinary performance in this first test match of the series. In 2022, if people remember what happened in 2022 in that series, Australia won the first test and then they lost the second test, and Sri Lanka were able to bounce back. Chandamal made 200. Pradap Jayasuriya got 12 wickets on test debut. So Sri Lanka will have that in the back of their mind, is that we've been in this position before. We played absolutely rubbish in the first test, but we bounced back in the second. So they've got to try and hang in. They've got to try and have that hope in the back of their mind, is that they can bounce back, but it's going to be very difficult. 2022 to 2025 is a different set of circumstances. They've lost this test match in 2025, the first test, by an innings and 242 runs. The batting was poor, the bowling was poor, the captaincy was poor. I don't know how they're going to turn that around in a short span of time. So they really need to bat better, they need to bowl better, and they need to captain better. And that's Dhananjaya De Silva. He needs to be better as a captain if they are going to win the second test. Now, in terms of team selection, you would think 2 changes will be possible for Sri Lanka. You would think Osara Fernando and Asita Fernando will probably miss out, and Pathum Nissanka will probably come back, open the batting, and I think Milan Ratnayaka will come into the 11. Obviously, Nissanka's been a pretty good top-order player for Sri Lanka for some time. He didn't play the first test because of injury, so Sri Lanka will badly want him back in the side. And also with Ratnayaka, Milan Ratnayaka, he's done pretty well He played in the series in England last year, scored some runs. I think he's got the highest score for number 8 or number 9 in Test cricket history. He's a very handy batter, so that will definitely strengthen Sri Lanka's lower order, because what we saw on the first test, Australia were able to get through their long tail quite easily. So with Ratnayaka, he can offer you some strength and stability with the bat, but he can also offer some overs with the ball. He's a medium pacer. So if Sri Lanka want to keep going down the 3-spinner approach, then they will select Ratnayaka, you would think, who can be that medium pace option. So the potential 11 for Sri Lanka could be Nasanka, Kuraratne, Chandamal, Matthews, Kamindu Mendes, De Silva, Kusal Mendes, Jayasuriya, Van der Sey, Perez, and Ratnayaka. So that is Sri Lanka's potential 11 for the second test. We should wait and see if that is the case in terms of their selections and hoping that they can perform better. We'll move on and talk about Australia quickly in terms of their selections and potential 11 for the second test. I don't think they'll make any changes. You don't need to make any changes. If you're winning and winning well, which they have done in this first test, you don't want to make any changes, really. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think they'll keep the same 11. The 3-spin attack worked well. Kuhnemann, Lyon, and Murphy. Obviously, Stark being the only quick. You've also got Bo Webster for another option. And for spin options, you've got Labuschagne and Head who can bowl off and leg spin. So they'll probably keep the same 11, Australia. No need to change it. So potential 11 for Australia: Kobayashi, Head, Labuschagne, Smith, Inglis, Carey, Webster, Stark, Kuhnemann, Lyon, and Murphy could be Australia's 11 for the next test. We shall wait and see. Now, in terms of the conditions and the pitch, we'll probably get a similar pitch, maybe a different pitch for the second test in Galle. That'll be interesting to see what sort of a surface is rolled out. But I don't think it will make too much of a difference anyway, because Australia, what we've seen in this first test match, they played really well in, conditions that weren't as extreme as you would see in Sri Lanka, but they handled themselves pretty well. And Sri Lanka, on the other hand, their spin bowling's not really performing as well. The batting is shaky, to say the least. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of a surface is rolled out for this second test. Only time will tell come the morning of day 1 of the second test. In terms of who's going to win, you would think Australia, with the confidence that they have after this first test, you would think they'll probably win this second test of the series. They've got a real opportunity to win their first series in Sri Lanka since 2011. They haven't won a test series in Sri Lanka since 2011, Australia. So they would like to win this second test match to really tick off a series win in Sri Lanka. So that's their motivation. Sri Lanka, on the other hand, it's going to be an uphill battle. If they perform the way they did in this first test and the second test, then they've got no chance of winning. They need to bat better. They need to bowl better. And Dhananjaya De Silva needs to captain better. If they can do that, they're a chance. But it's going to be tough for Sri Lanka. We shall wait and see what happens in terms of their performance in the second test. We can only judge their performance after the second test and seeing what the result could be after the second test. So they're up against it, but as we saw in 2022, they can definitely bounce back. But this time around, it's going to be a very difficult task to do that. So we shall see what happens come the second test of this series. Some of my final thoughts and observations from this first test of the series between Sri Lanka and Australia. This first test only lasted 9 sessions, which Australia dominated every single one and bullied Sri Lanka into submission. Australia in this first test showed they mean business and are not going to roll over, as they often do in the subcontinent on recent tours. This records innings defeat reflected how Sri Lanka played in the first test. They were poor in all 3 departments and never looked like defeating Australia, let alone compete against them. But in the 2022 series, they lost the first test and then bounced back to win the second test. Whether they can do that in 2025 after this performance remains to be seen. So let's hope that Sri Lanka can bounce back. It's going to be a difficult task, as I mentioned, but if they can bat, bowl, and field better Sri Lanka and take their chances, then they are a good chance of winning the second test. But Australia, you would think, with the momentum that they have at the moment, it's going to be very difficult for Sri Lanka to bounce back. So we shall see what happens after the second test of the series. Thanks, everyone, for listening to our first test review between Sri Lanka and Australia. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know your thoughts on this first test between Sri Lanka and Australia in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching and listening. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.